Hello and welcome to another episode of Album Musings. So in this episode we're taking a look at Spilt Milk by Jellyfish, released on February the 9th, 1993. So this episode is going out on the 8th of February 2023. So as always, I'm going to go through various things about the album from the Wikipedia page, and then I'll have a look at the UK charts, and I'll finish off with a little set of sort of personal stories, anecdotes around the time this album came out and my sort of involvement and my introduction to this album. And I'll talk a little bit about the local gig scene as well, and you'll all see what the connection is when I get there. So Spilt Milk was the second and last studio album by the band Jellyfish. So yeah, they split up sometime after this album. So let's try and sort of place this album on a timeline. So they were active from 89 to 94. So the album came out in 93, so the year following they split. In terms of their discography, as I've already mentioned, just two albums. Belly Button came out in 1990 and Spilt Milk in 93. Now there you can see there's a couple of live albums, some EPs. These are, a lot further on after their sort of initial run, if you like. It looks like there's been some sort of I don't know if you'd call it reformation, but yeah, some sort of getting together of bands. If we have a quick look at the time of band members, if we could have a quick look at the timeline, yeah, it does really just cover the period we've spoken about. So clearly any sort of post Jellyfish connections, I'm assuming, aren't counted as being Jellyfish. So a quick look at the singles. So yeah, 10, is that 10 singles? Yeah. And you can see really here, we're going to talk about a couple of singles in this episode. You can see here, yeah, things didn't really pan out so well after the first couple of singles off the album. It was interesting how many singles they actually had off of the Belly Button album, considering the album itself didn't appear to chart in the UK, but the singles did. So yeah, I'm not quite sure why that was. So back to the Spilt Milk album. Seemed to get pretty good reviews generally at the time it came out. A few not so good, and then retrospectively, time has been kind on the album. It's funny that being criticised the production for being too big for its own good. One thing I would say, and I'll explain in a moment the circumstances under which I came to listen to this album, because it ties in with stuff towards the end of the video. But one thing that struck me was I really loved the production on this. It reminded me a lot of 70s power pop bands, but also there was something, not in the way the band sound musically necessarily between this band and Queen, but there was certain aspects of the dynamics and the production and the spaces in the music which I could hear between this band and Queen, particularly with Queen when they were most at their sort of power pop influenced period. So yeah, it's interesting that it didn't sound like Queen to me, but some of the production aspects, and certainly the dynamics did. It made me think of certain Queen albums. But I think a lot of people saw connections between this band and bands that were known for a lot of, really good studio work, like the Beach Boys or like the Beatles. That as well. So there's the lineup. And you saw on the previous timeline, if I just quickly, where does it go back to the timeline here? So we've got the first album. We have, you can see, apart from this period, them being generally a three-piece. So the first album's here. So for the second album, we've got a bass player here, as opposed to, I suppose, what you could call a multi-instrumentalist here. So this is Tim Smith. So and this is the period I was introduced to them. I did go back and listen to the earlier album, to Belly Button, but I much preferred Spilt Milk. In terms of the charts, you can see the highest position in the UK is 21, 164 on the Billboard, did get to number 8 on the Heatseeker albums, number 100 in Japanese albums, Swedish 33. So I think worldwide, probably didn't do that well. If we look at album of the year, to just get some feel for the popularity of the albums based on their metric, I'm not surprised to see Jellyfish over the top of Belly Button. Again, we only have 2 albums, so we can't really see a massive chronological arc here, as we've seen with other albums. So really, there's 2. As I said, this one seemed to do better single wise, but not so much album wise, and the reverse was true of this. So let's look at some of those stats. And saying that, this was only in the UK albums charts for a couple of weeks, and only 1 week in the top 40, didn't even get into the top 20. So what was it alongside on its best week? So let's get up to where it is, and we'll work back from there, and you can probably see what it was up against. So here it is, and as we work backwards, Rage Against the Machine, this was all over the radio. I think I've mentioned before, at this point in 93, we had a radio in the lab, albeit fairly quietly, so I was getting a really good idea about what was being played on the radio. And so we've got here's Rage Against the Machine, Keep the Faith by Bon Jovi, Modern Life is Rubbish by Blur, Beethoven Was Deaf by Morrissey, Duran Duran The Wedding Album. Gary Moore was having a bit of a resurgence at that time as well. I don't know if reinvented himself is quite the word, because I've always, regarded him as like a multi-genre guitarist anyway, because I was aware of his work in Colosseum 2, in addition to his work with Thin Lizzy and as a solo artist. So I was aware that he could play a multitude of different styles, and this was his, I suppose you could call it his blues period. So I remember that. Sting, Dire Straits still had stuff being kicked out. Republic by New Order. So this is quite important to a later story, and I'll get back to this. So this would have been the 16th of May. So you can see there's a bit of a delay here. This came out on February the 9th, but didn't really hit the charts until the 16th of May. Let me just check that actually when that was so that was the first week it was in there, and it went down the following week. And now I've re-seen this, what I'm going to tell you in a moment all falls nicely into place as how I was exposed to this, and New Order's Republic at the same time. We had 2 Unlimited with no limits, and Automatic for the People was at number 1 in the album charts. Now, single side of things, when I go through these, so these first 4 here are off of the, during the period from their first album, and this is the period from their second album. So this is the period we're going to be talking about. So two singles. The Goes to number 1. I don't have an exact date for when that came out, but what we can do is just look at the charts, see when it hit the charts. So here's the chart run. So 43, 50, 72. So it didn't even scratch the top 40. I don't even remember hearing this on the radio. The only reason I listened to it because I listened to the album. And that was for, again, look, May really was the run. And let's see what that was brushing up alongside in the charts, even though it was way, way out. So if we go down, down, there we are. Straight in at number 43 and then out again. Oh look, front 242. Cats in the Cradle, oh yeah. Ugly Kid Joe. For Tomorrow by Blur. Oh, Ships by Big Country, wow. No limits. Or No Lyrics, I think as it was called at the time. Dream, Come Undone by Duran Duran. Shaggy, Wind Up, Rewound, The Prodigy. Wind It Up, would that have been off their first album? Not sure. Everybody Hurts, Regret by New Order, off the album I just mentioned. I Have Nothing by Whitney Houston. And there was that 5 Live EP. So that would have been the one off the back of the Queen gig that was done after Freddie Mercury died, where they had up, various musicians of the day to stand in, and off the back of that, there's this George Michael and Lisa Stansfield with Queen release that did really well. Second single, New Mistake, July the 5th, 93, so same year. Got into the charts, well, not until August, and again didn't even hit the top 40. Its best position was the second week it got in the charts. And let's see what it was alongside that week. So, see if anybody's still around from earlier on in the year. We've got M People, Roxette. Yeah, they were in and out of the charts during the 90s. I'm not too familiar with Four Non Blondes. Gabrielle, yeah. Chakademus and Pliers. Michael Jackson, UB40, who I would have name checked because there was that remix cover, whatever you want to call it, on the Gorgeous album by 808 State of an early UB40 number. I was talking about that last week. Oh, Two Princes by the Spin Doctors. Ace of Base. This was part of Paul Weller's, I suppose what I think of his third wave, where he was a bit more folky. Lisa Stanfield. Utah Saints. What Time Frequency, I remember them. I think I've got one CD single by them. Levelers were doing pretty well around that period. They're a band from Brighton on the south coast in the UK. Runaway Train by Soul Asylum. Yeah, I had the CD single of that. Big Gun by AC/DC. Three Little Pigs by Green Jelly. I think I've mentioned them before. Oh, there it is. New Mistake by Jellyfish. Wow. So on to this week's little ramble at the end of these. So I mentioned Republic, which came out on the 3rd of May, and as we saw, if we look at the singles chart, where is it for that week? So this is the 16th of May. So that Republic album by New Order just pretty much shot in within a week or so after it was released. And so what happened was, it must have been around the time this album came out and it was on the charts. I got invited to, with a group of friends, to I suppose a listening party where we sat down. There was about 5 or 6 of us with some drink. At that point, I wasn't drinking alcohol, so it was soft drinks for me, and had a listen through to Republic by New Order and Spilt Milk by Jellyfish, and I must say it's one of the nicest evenings I've ever had, just to sit through, listen to a couple of albums playing in the background. We were out in someone's house. We were all in our 20s at the time, and we were out in someone's parents' house, out in I think they had a nice what would you call it, conservatory. We're sitting out there listening to Republic by New Order and Spilt Milk by Jellyfish. Fantastic evening. And so whenever I listen to these two albums, it takes me back to that time. And what was interesting is that was a group of friends who I met through another friend from work, although the group of friends didn't work at the same place I did. And what was interesting is around that time, from 93, when I was still working in a lab, through to the later 90s, when I was working in an office doing contract chasing and moving into more sort of, I suppose you'd call it, computer support, as opposed to using computers for doing number crunching and bacterial identification. I was involved. I knew a lot of people, a lot of my friends that I met through work were involved with bands. And this particular group of friends, there were two things they were involved with. One was, there was one member, I think, there, when we listened to it, who was a member of a band called Steerpike, a local band. And also a couple of people that were at this sort of listening party, for want of a better word, were also involved with like a local magazine that had like a gig guide and ads in it and various other things. I think it was called 5D. And at that period as well, I was going to a lot of local live gigs. And that was because, I was going to see friends in the bands. I had another friend who I met later when I went over to working in the office, who he was involved with bands as well, and ended up having a local band called Troy, I think they were called, and he'd previously been involved with lots of different bands. He'd emigrated over from Australia years ago and was involved in bands in Australia. And then same place I worked, which was an office where we were doing computer support, the guy that was in charge of the support line was in a thrash band called Rife. So I was going to watch all of those bands in addition to other ones. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about the three of the venues that I used to go to. I'm not sure if any of these, well, I know definitely one of them doesn't have live bands because it's not a pub anymore. And I've mentioned it on several occasions now. But I'm not sure about the other two. So the first one I'm going to mention is the Dorset Arms. This is in a place called East Grinstead, a town in Sussex, and not far away from where I grew up, which is Forest Row. And upstairs here, so I don't think it's any longer. I think it closed long time ago. was a venue they used to run called the 101 Club, and I saw a lot of bands up there. A lot of pleasant evenings spent up there, hanging out with friends, watching bands. So that was a place I used to go, the Dorset Arms, and the club was called the 101 Club. Another place I've mentioned on numerous occasions is Shelly Arms, which is in Nutley, again fairly close to Forest Row. I've shown pictures of the venue before and after. It's been converted now to like a residential place, although the structure's the same. But I managed to find some gig guides from the Shelly Arms from back in the day, and looking at the bands that were playing at that time, this must have been early to mid 90s, and I know I went to see a UK Subs gig there, definitely, and they were still, they're a punk band from the late 70s, and they were still gigging, and they played up at the Shelly Arms. It's a pretty small venue. Secret Treaties were a Blois the Cult cover band of the time, but I noticed Overtoad here, so that was a band. I think one of the band members in there ultimately went on to be in Steerpike, and there was a really cool covers band at the time called Dirty Shoes, who I saw numerous times. They did lots of really cool like rock covers, lots of AC/DC. Dumpy's Rusty Nuts played there. I've never seen them live. Peter and the Test Tube Babies. Guana Bats I didn't see at the Shelly, but I did see supporting the Cramps down in Brighton, way back in the mid-80s actually. And then Not So Clear. This must be a later gig guide, I think. But I always loved these really old style hand-drawn gig guides. Yeah. Is anybody else there I recognise? I don't think so. So yeah, this definitely would have been around the 90s. I'm not sure. I can't see any dates specifically. You see, things went a bit more upmarket. There's one here. You can see it's looks like it's had a few encounters with beer. I don't know if I can zoom in on that how well. Oh yeah. I know they used to have like DJs up here as well. It's funny, I don't recognise any of them. Oh, there's UK Subs, Punk Legends. Jaded Angel. Oh, Dirty Shoes again. So yeah, this must have been the Cadillacs. I'm just trying to see if there's any one where I particularly know by the other bands that played either side that I definitely went on that night, but I can't really see here. Well, I can see it, but the ones I've looked at so far. I love the fact that someone's just must have had copies of these that were kicking around there, and either they've, these must be all like beer, mopping up the beer from the bar or drinks or whatever. Oh crikey, the BBMFs. That was a local punk band. Scuba Patrol and Headway. I don't see the infamous Bad Bands of Sussex gig. And then finally, another place I wanted to mention. This is a lovely place in Felbridge, which is Lingfield, technically. Yeah, sorry. So you go through East Grinstead, you go through Felbridge, you end up in Lingfield. On the way to Lingfield, off down this little country lane, there's a place called the Wiremill. It's lovely. It's on a lake. and they do water ski. They used to do. I don't know if they still do. They used to do water skiing down here. Yeah, food there is, again, it's been a long time since I've been there. Living over in Canada now, and I can't even remember the times I visited. How many times we've actually been there? But yeah, lovely place. Oh, that's a very flash website. Yeah, many a lunchtime. This was just close enough to be able to drive to from a place I used to work. So sometimes we'd go down here on a Friday and have a lunch. But I've also come in the evening with friends, and the reason why it's here is because they used to have bands downstairs at one point. I don't know if they still do. I'm not sure. So there we have it. That's my album musings for Jellyfish album Spilt Milk, along with a little bit of a reminisce of back in the day when this came out, and many pleasant day hanging out with friends, listening to albums and going to local gigs. Thanks very much for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next episode.